I think it is time to create some melodies, and I think this is one of the most important aspects of producing music, because where do you start when you're writing a melody? This was one of the first questions I asked myself back in 2008-9 when I started producing music, because I came from a background as a drummer and not as a music composer or music producer. There was very little material on YouTube about composing records, and about how do I start a song and how do I, what is the difference between major and minor scales and why is that important for producing music. So I decided to just go on with producing music, and I did whatever felt was right. And I never really knew if it was the right chord, for example, or sometimes I would write a chord and I wouldn't even know how it was built, you know what I mean? Or what would be the next chord. I did everything by ear, and nothing that I've done was really because of any form of knowledge. So I made many mistakes. I think I made all the mistakes possible. I would fit like chords into patterns that were not possible. I would go from minor to major, which actually is not even a mistake, because it can sound really cool to change from minor to major within one song. And I'll try to demonstrate that. The importance of writing melodies, I understood, I think, let's say when I met David Guetta back in 2012. He really introduced me on how important it is to have a chord progression. And because of him, I met another music producer named Giorgio Tuynfort, and he to me is one of the most inspiring music composers I've ever met. A genius when it comes to writing melodies and chords. And I think the combination between David and Giorgio really resulted in some amazing songs, and I was really lucky to be a little part of that process back then for the process of writing the album for Rihanna, Unapologetic. David invited me to a studio session so I could meet her, work on some other songs. So I think back then I realized, okay, it's not about how fat the beat sounds. And he really taught me that. It is about the song. And if you want to, gain some form of success on radio, you need to have a song. A simple fat kick drum is not enough. It's not going to get you there. It can work in the clubs, but it will not be enough when you're putting out music and you want to have some, pop music success. And I think David was one of the first to really understand how to convert cool club music also to radio, and back from radio to the clubs. So yeah, I was so lucky to learn from that process. And there were a few things I really took with me when starting a song. So if you start a song, I think it's fair to say that you can start from anything. You don't need a particular instrument. It can be a vocal chop. It can be as easy as a bass loop. It could be a kick drum. If that is what motivates you and if that is what inspires you, that could be the offset of a great start of a song. Now, talking about those chords again, who's going to tell you how you have to put the chords together? I did everything by ear. I had no knowledge about anything whatsoever when it comes to music theory. Recently, I started to dig into the theory a little bit more to understand why things are called the way they are called, and why some chords work together, and what the difference are between chords. Like, what is a 7, for example? What is a 9? What is diminished? What is sus2 and sus4? All those things can really help you into production process. And I'm still really convinced that you don't have to know everything, because sometimes too much knowledge is going to take you away from the purpose. So I believe in a good set of, let's say, the basics of how to create music and how to create a chord progression. So I learned that by a website called Hook Theory. And Hook Theory is a website that explains you in quite of an easy language how chord progressions work. What is the difference between different chords, and what are the patterns? Because music has to deal with patterns. Ultimately, there are just 7 notes where you have to deal with. So putting them together in place in the right scale is going to get you music, and that's where the magic happens. So let's dig into Hook Theory. I'm going to open my book, which is the Hook Theory 1. And it's going to tell you the difference between those notes. And also it's going to give us colors, the major scale, the minor scale. Now let's play out this bar. I know it sounds really cheesy and it sounds very amateur and beginnerish, but it is the fundament, guys. We're talking about the fundament. We're not talking about some superficial chord here, but it is the beginning, and this is so-called the C major scale. You also have the A minor scale. Different feeling, but what they have in common, it's all white keys. So you can play all of the chords on the white keys when it comes to the C major scale or the A minor scale. So A minor, so yeah, they really explain you about, songs that have been made in those keys, and they'll tell you how to play it and, how it would work. But it's super interesting to see how these hit songs are built up and, what are the keys and what is the theory behind those hit songs. So they'll go over the scales and what the relatives are, what the keys are being used, how it's put together, and how you come back with patterns and not only notes. So it will tell you the formation of notes and the varieties of different chords and how it would look like on a guitar, which is completely different than from keys. And it also shows you the difference between major and minor. Let me see if I can play a chord. I wonder what you hear if I play this. So this is the minor chord. That is major. It's basically the difference between a really happy song and a more of a sad song. If you know how to achieve certain emotions through chords, it can really help you to get that, crowd in front of you to a certain emotional place. So if you have that knowledge, how do I convert this chord into an emotion? Well, you have a good start knowing the difference between major and minor. This is a really interesting part of hook theory where I want to just dig in before we go on to the next chapter, or basically the next part of this chapter. It's not only about chords, it's also about a pattern. Listen to this part. So there you go. They play the single notes and then they play the chord. So you basically have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, let's say 7 possibilities before it starts again transposed. And you can place those 7 chords in your own order. So when you're writing, for example, chords, you can say, okay, this is 2, 4, 5, 1. I'm just saying 1, 3, 2, 5. And if you start understanding the logic behind, the patterns, it's going to be so much easier to write chords. And the only thing next to the knowledge about how it works theory-wise, the only thing you need to do is train your ears. You have to hear the difference between those things. This is something like everyday play. Every day I get to the studio, or maybe even when I'm not in the studio, I'll, take place behind the piano at my house. I'm going to start playing. I don't have to necessarily write a song. Sometimes it's enough to just play around and see, okay, what does it do if I play this chord? And what happens if I play an extra key? And this really gave me so much more knowledge than just reading it in a book. Everyday practice is going to make perfect.